Hey guys, it's Danae, and I am back with the Philadelphia Sunday Sun here every Sunday at 2 p.m. on Facebook and on my personal YouTube. You can look me up at Danae Reed, or you can check out the Sun's Facebook page at the Philadelphia Sunday Sun. This week, I have here with me Jared. He's going to talk about his podcast, which I'm super excited to hear about because I don't really get to talk to other
Oh
podcasts too
shucks.
much. Yeah, so he's going to talk about his show. It's relatively new. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. We're actually posting the sixth episode today. So
Wow.
yeah, it's still pretty fresh.
Awesome, awesome. So, well, the episode is going to get posted Sunday. So today is the 23rd, right?
Yes, yes. So we
Okay, so
drop every Tuesday.
awesome. So you guys, you'll be checking this out on Sunday. We're taping this on a Tuesday, so make sure you guys are checking out the It Is What It Is podcast every Tuesday at what time?
Yes. It ranges. I'm still figuring things out. So you can expect it by between like 12 and 2.
Awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jared, I say all that to say, please introduce yourself. Tell everybody why you're here, what we're going to talk about, all that great stuff.
Ah, shucks. Well, first and foremost, it's an extreme honor to be on here.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the podcast has been pretty humbling because it's like it's my first time doing something like that on my own. So the support that I get is honestly beyond overwhelming. So I just want to say thank you for that, and anybody that's listening. Um, so my name is Jared Smith. I'm the host of the It Is What It Is podcast with Jared Smith. My name. And like Danae said, we drop every Tuesday. And honestly, the main focal points of the show is to not only like entertain and to educate and to let people laugh, but it's also meant to inspire people to kind of like make the best of what it is that they have now
Right.
to push themselves to the next level. So the main theme of all of our episodes is self accountability. And the beautiful thing about all of the guests that are on the show as of now, pretty much everything that they're doing or they're about to embark on, they've they always all share that moment of like, this is the point in my life where I decided to take ownership
Mm.
of their lives and the direction it was going to put them into the areas they are now, which is extremely inspiring. Right now, I do. My favorite thing about it is that it is people that are relatively around the same age, and they're either doing something or they're about to start something. And the main reason why I kind of go out my way to find people like that is because I feel like when you see those motivational things on Instagram and Facebook, and your celebrities are given like, "Hey, this is the moment." I think it really romanticizes the struggle that comes with doing better for yourself.
Yeah.
So I kind of like having people that are like in the midst of it talk about it, because the one thing I notice is that everybody's afraid to start,
Mm.
and that's kind of what we inspire people to do, is just to start. Like we're not saying that, like my podcast, it may never be as big as Joe Rogan's, which is fine, but the thing I take pride in is that I started.
Right.
And that's just pretty much what I want to inspire people to do, is just to start.
Awesome. So, you saying, a lot of people are scared to, are afraid to start. I feel like saying afraid to sounds better than scared to. So I'm going to switch. So I
That's
feel,
fine. That's fine. That's fine.
no, no,
I like that.
whatever. But anyway, so I do think that a lot of people are afraid to start, right? And so I'm wondering for you, do you think that it's people are scared of success or people are scared of failure?
Oof. You know, I'm gonna say this. I think people are afraid of failure,
Mm,
and the failure isn't always the crashing and burning and you lose absolutely everything and you got to sell all your worldly possessions. I think what people are afraid of failure is the failure to have receive acknowledgement from the people around you.
mm,
I think that, at least from my personal experience as well, like when I started it, it was just like, when I was talked about it, people, oh, I'm excited, I'm excited, I'm excited, I'm excited. And then like when I finally started it, it was just like
mm.
3 likes, 5 likes, 6 likes, 7 likes, and I'm like begging, like, and it felt to the point where I was begging people, and that's what I felt, and I think that's the area people are afraid of, is because I realized is that when you're successful, everybody's on board,
Oh,
everybody's on board. So that's why, like, a lot of the famous things that people are afraid of success than failure, I don't think that to be true. I just think people's concept of failure is what's subjective. But I feel like once you're successful, everybody's on board because it's easier to support it now, So I just think it's that fear of failure to receive acknowledgement from your peers or your family and things like that.
Right, right. Well, from one host to another, I know that the interviewer, and we talked about this off the record, but the interviewer never really gets interviewed. So I'm going to ask,
Yeah.
you've talked about other people and their moments of how they, know that they were kind of in there on the right path. For you, like, what was that moment like for you when you decided, like, okay, look, I'm going to make a podcast? And was that like a pivot moment? Like, was this something that you had planned to do prior to? Like, take us through that moment of where you were like, okay, this is exactly what I'm supposed to do.
Wow, that's such a great question. I'm like beyond flattered being asked these questions, but I actually wanted to start this podcast. I want to say like 3 years ago,
Wow.
and I just never did it. Because I wanted to be perfect,
Mhm.
and I was not so sure as to what voice I wanted the podcast to have. Like I didn't know what it is I wanted to speak from. I didn't know what it was I wanted to speak to. So and it was around that time I was like kind of insecure about like who I was. So I felt like everything I did, I felt like I had to speak as if I was an expert on things.
Mhm.
And what I realized was that it's just a matter of like sometimes you're just forever going to be a student.
Right.
So what that moment for me when I came to understand that, yo, like I'm forever going to be learning, I'm forever going to be, picking things up and putting them down, failing and succeeding, it just hit me. I was just like, that's what life is all about.
Right.
So when I decided to say, hey, I'm going to go back to being a student, it then opened me up to, okay, I can learn from this person, I can learn from that person. And I was just like, well, if I like this feeling of learning and being educated by different peoples from all walks of life, I was like, that's what the podcast could be about.
Dope. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's so powerful that you kind of took us through the moment where you or through a time where you kind of felt like you were insecure. And so because of that, you kind of put yourself on like this like pedestal. And I think that
Yeah.
a lot of times people don't talk about the fact that their insecurities do make them act in a way that might be, you know, as they might explain themselves or describe themselves as a person who's kind of like up here, or not even necessarily like say that, but kind of give off that vibe. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's really awesome that you're able to kind of like acknowledge that. But so then my next question for you would be, how do you feel now? It's like 3 years later, a culmination of all these things of personal changes, of growth, of things that you've realized about yourself, about the world. What does it feel like now that you're able to put that into a podcast after it's been, such a long time coming?
Um, it's liberating,
Okay.
honestly. Like I said, like that fear of not being perfect and honestly the vulnerability of putting forth something you've always wanted to do in its rawest state.
Mhm.
I think now that that is out the way, it's honestly liberating.
Right.
The support I've been getting from the people that do support, as redundant as that sounds, um, it's really been overwhelming. And then in a way, it kind of showed me like the people and the situations and the relationships I should be investing in now. So honestly, after having started, it kind of just like uh put like organized my life in a sense, and right now I'm not afraid of anything at this point, like it's not perfect, but now that I'm putting it out there, it's like I don't want it to be perfect. I don't want it to be um the the world's best podcast. I want to be my best podcast. And it just kind of gave me the confidence and the boost that I needed to just really apply that confidence to every walk of life. Because, like I said, I think the hardest thing is starting. Because once you start, you truly start. Once you truly start something, I feel like you can't put it down if it's what you really want to do.
Yeah, yeah. So just speaking on vulnerability, how important do you think it is to be vulnerable when you have something like a podcast?
I think vulnerability is the only way things could really be truly authentic, and I think when people are open and honest about being vulnerable about who they are and their shortcomings, I think it allows people to trust you. So
Yeah.
especially with being as a podcast host, that's the one thing I always want my guests and even my audience to do is to trust me. So that's how come on my podcast. I'm not afraid to talk about what I fell short at. I'm
Yeah.
not afraid to talk about what I need work at. I'm not afraid to talk about what I don't know.
Yeah.
And I feel like once you lead with that, people are like can relate to it.
Yeah.
And and I think that's the most important thing. You definitely want your guests to trust you, and they're the experts. At least for when I'm talking to them, like at the end of the day, I'm talking to them about their lives. They're the expert on their lives, um, and you know, it's truly been great. And it honestly, and also, like I said, just goes back to that confidence thing. It's just like if you could be yourself behind closed doors, but most importantly in front of other people. Well, no, just as importantly in front of other people. It just I don't want to say it's this feeling of invincibility, but it's that feeling of like I'm who I am, and no one can change that. No one can take that from me. So
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. As a person who used to struggle with being vulnerable, and it sounds like you might have been that way as well. I'm wondering, in your opinion, why do you think that so many people stray away from being vulnerable, or aren't as open or aren't as willing to be open with their emotions and their experiences and things like that?
right. That's such a good question. So like I said, this is all from personal experience. Like I don't want people to think with the glasses on that I think I know
No, no,
everything,
of course, but I
but
think to your point, when you're interviewing somebody, they are the expert of their own lives, and so
right.
I'm just curious to know, from your perspective, why do you think so many people struggle with that?
I think the reason why a lot of it's a multi-layered issue, so I think I could break it down into like 4 points. I think first is the vulnerability leaves you open to being hurt.
Mm.
I think that's number one. I think people are afraid of being hurt. Um, but on the other side of that hurt is also extreme joy too. Everything I'm learning in life when it comes to opening up is that everything is always twofold. You can either be happy or you can be sad, at peace or in chaos. So I feel like a lot of times when people think of vulnerability, they automatically jump to, I don't want to be hurt again.
Right.
But it's like, but you could also be happy again too.
Yeah.
Number two, I think um, I call it a winning formula when it comes to people's portrayal of themselves. And you can see it all the time on social media. Like I feel like people think that there's a certain way that they have to go about winning in life,
Mhm.
that everybody starts to kind of follow that same pattern and train of thought. And when it comes to vulnerability, a lot of times the way of doing things that other people do them aren't necessarily the same. So it's that fear of standing out, like, oh, what the heck are they doing? You
Right.
know. Three, it's also lonely. When you lead with your true authentic self, because the relationships that were based upon um, false representations of yourself, or things that you're overextending yourself for, like those tend to drift away as you lead with your authentic self. Because like at the
Yeah.
end of the day, like I feel like everybody knows who they are. It's just that I think people are afraid to be who they are
Mm.
because they know what it is that they'll lose if they do that. Like you may lose some relationships with some friends and some family if you're like, okay, I know I don't really want to do this, but because I want this relationship, I do it. But if you lead with like who you really are, that relationship may be severed.
Right.
So I just think that people are just afraid of just running with who they are,
I,
and also, sorry, last thing too.
no, no, take your time.
No, we live in a social society, so everything is predicated based upon someone else's validation. So pretty much everybody looks for a cosign before they do something,
Hmm.
and I think that people go with what they know people approve of to do, and that just ends up being what everybody else is doing.
Right, right. Wow, I'm just like listening to you talk. Also, guys, I keep like rubbing my eye. I'm not like crying. Like what Jared is saying is really great and awesome,
I
but
would say, oh.
I'm not being emotional right now. I am an emotional person, but I'm not being emotional. My eyes are just tearing because I have awful allergies. Okay, so my next question to you, it is what it is one of my favorite Black colloquialisms. And so I want to know, like, what made you decide to name your show that? Because I could see how it ties into it perfectly. But I want you to like explain that and kind of take us through the process of naming because I have a hard time naming things. And
Me
so I just
too.
want to know, like, how did you decide it is what it is?
Oh
What
man.
does that, I mean,
So
and honestly too, I'm sorry to cut you off,
no,
but
you're fine. You're fine.
also,
You're fine.
like, what does that even mean? Like, we say that all the time, but it's like, what does that mean? So I want you to touch on both things.
All right. So is my mic okay?
Yeah, yeah, you sound great.
Okay. Okay. Um, Jeez. I want to. So I have to take a step back. So when I first started it, I was this was like the 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my partner at the time had actually helped me name what it was at the time, which was Jaywalk, which is like a play off my name, and expressing freedom, things like that. So like honestly, like after the breakup, and I was like, I really want to do the podcast. I was like, I don't want to like I don't want to do anything that was you know what I mean, like attached to a previous situation, because then every time I turn on and I see the name, I'm like, oh
Like,
man.
yeah, no, I
So
feel you 100%.
number one, it was out of pettiness that I changed the name, but honestly, it is what it is. It was just something I always found myself saying in situations where I was like, all right, this is just what the situation is.
Mm-hmm.
And and a lot of times I would say it, as if I was defeated, like there was just nothing else left for me. But then what I realized at the same time though is when I accepted things for what they are, my perspective on that situation, other situations started to shift, that allowed me to um formulate a game plan to get to the next level. And the pivotal moment for me where I realized that that mindset worked was my previous job I was at. Like I absolutely hated it. Like the pay was trash. There was no hope for promotion or a raise, and I was just like, all right, it is what it is. Like if I stay here, this is just what the situation's going to be. And then at that moment it was like, bro, like just get another job. Now,
Yeah.
mind you, I was in that industry for 7 years, so I didn't really know anything, but I was just like, it is what it is. Like, this is what this situation's gonna be. Now, how do I connect my current situation to where it is I want to be? And I realized the only way to do that is to take ownership
Mm-hmm.
of myself
Right.
and where it is I want to go. And when I started to flip the meaning of it into an inspiring one, I was like, why not name my podcast that? And it took a while because like I had to when I was thinking about the podcast, I had like so many names, but I was just like, what is something that represents me,
Right.
in my way of life? And I realized that whenever I just accepted situations for what they are, it allowed me to move forward. And I think a lot of times with people, they accept the situation for what it is and they stay there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the podcast is like, all right,
Right.
accept it and move forward. Like, you know what I mean? Like, don't just stay there. Because a lot of people accept their situations. I think I think that what people don't understand is like, when you see people like, in terrible or tumultuous situations that they are willingly staying in. Now, this isn't a one size approach to everything, but like, in a situation where it's like, oh my God, like, her boyfriend keep cheating on her. Like, why is she staying? Why is she staying? Why is she...
Right.
9 times out of, like, what was going on with Derrick Jaxn and everything right now, it's like the person accepted this is what it is,
Yeah.
but instead of figuring out what can I do to move forward, it's what do I have to do to be comfortable,
Right. And I'm
you
glad
know?
you brought up the Derrick Jaxn situation because I honestly had no idea who he was, but I feel like it ties into our conversation perfectly about the importance of being honest
Yes.
and like living in your truth, because I had never heard of the man until yesterday. He's like a YouTuber or something like that.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
he does these videos and he like gives advice and he's kind of like a podcaster too. And then it comes out that he's preaching these things, but he's living a separate life. And I think that that does two things. One, everybody's human, everybody makes mistakes, right? But if you put yourself in the public eye, it's important to live up to what you're saying, but
Yeah.
also to acknowledge your shortcomings. I think is really important, especially again as a podcaster, as a public figure. But it's so interesting to me that we talk about vulnerability and how important it is, but it seems that a lot of these big name people who have these podcasts and these platforms, they're being what we think is vulnerable, but then there's so much going on behind the scenes that we don't know, and that's just like completely contradicts the face that is given. And so
Mm-hmm.
I wanted you, I guess, now to speak on that. What are your thoughts on that, really? Because as again, as somebody who's in the industry, or who's trying to break into the podcast arena and really prides himself on being vulnerable and truthful, what are your thoughts on the people who aren't that way but are getting put on by lies?
Yeah, it's a lot of things. I don't want to get too zodiac-ish, but
Yeah, okay,
yeah,
that's
I'm in Aquarius, so like whenever anything, if anybody can relate, like when something feels off, it's
mhm,
off. Like I just I don't question it at this point in my life anymore. So like when he first came onto the scene, I was just like, this don't seem right. Like this
yeah,
doesn't seem right. Like you know what I mean? And so whenever he would come on, I would just roll my eyes like, all right, this dude right here.
yeah.
And then when it came out, I wasn't shocked. I
Mm,
think the only thing that shocked me was that I found out he was actually married, because when you see his content, it comes off as if he is a single man just giving black women, dating advice and things
wow.
like that.
I have to check
And
out his videos because, like I said, I just
yeah,
videos yesterday and just read articles. But
and it's intentional. Like it's intentional. It's like, and that's the thing about it. Is like, bro, your exclusion of your wife and your kids
mm,
is intentional because you know what it is you want your brand to
to
be
be,
about. Now, here's the thing: like your brand and who you are as a person aren't always going to be the same thing.
yeah,
Like, there's no way anybody's gonna get me to believe that Drake and Aubrey Graham are the same person. There's just no, like, there's just no. But that's fine. Like, that's fine. But the problem is if your brand is based upon lies and a lifestyle that you yourself don't live, in order to keep up with what it is you put out there, everything you do now has to feed into that lie. And I think that was the most disappointing thing about him. And then two, him talking about other people's situations. Now that was my thing. It's like me personally, like even if I type up something where I'm trying to be like shady towards somebody, like a celebrity's message situation, I always delete it because one, that has been me, and two, it could be me very much again. So my thing is when it comes to people's relationships, I if it's like abuse is the only thing where I'm just like, all right, yo, like that's drawing. But anything else outside that, it's none of my business. It's
mm,
none of my business. It's none of my business. Oh, what about Cardi and Offset? None of my business.
mm,
It's really none of my business.
mm,
Like J Lo and A Rod, it's none of my business. So my thing is like, bro, if your brand was built upon building, like investing in the wholesome woman, and you talking bad upon people that do this and people that do that, not that those things aren't wrong, but it's like if you're not living it, don't preach it.
mm,
You
yeah,
know, like that's my thing, and that's how come for me. It's like I always lead forward with I'm still figuring everything out. Like my relationship, my podcast, my own life, my finances. I'm always leading with I'm no expert in anything. I'm an expert student. I always know how to ask questions. I always know how to get information. But if I started coming on here talking about, oh, this is what you have to do to save money, and then somebody pulled my Equifax report and was like, oh, bro, you want to talk about money? Well, explain this. Everything I've done up until that point is invalidated.
yeah.
So, you
So why
know,
do you think it's so easy for people then, with these platforms, to lead fake lives? Why do you think it's so easy for them to do that, knowing that somebody could one day pull their card?
That's a great question, and I actually have this conversation all the time. So, what I like to compare it to is like the reason why it was probably easier for people to cheat and have different, whole separate families back in the
Back
day
in like the day.
versus now, right? Is because with social media now, you can be anything you want to be.
Mhm.
You could pretend to be anything you want to be. And then me personally, when I started learning about leasing and financing, you can lease and finance anything you want. So it's like now in this day and age where everything is so, literally all you need is this. And like I said too, and I'm gonna go back to what you asked, like why when people pull their car, but the main reason why people build those things up is because um it's what people want to see.
Right.
It's what people want to hear, and that's where I feel like pandering comes into play with a lot of stuff that the dude did. Is like, you know, it's easy to get into certain markets like that with the content that he was making. Especially like I said, when I talk to black women, and even when I was dating, the experiences that they had, you know, but dating other like dating dudes and all the stuff that goes into being a single black woman, it was like it was kind of like easy for him to say like, all right, cool, this is what I could talk about,
Mhm.
and that's what a lot of people do. Like I said, the thing I said a lot of people are afraid to do is they're afraid to start. So what happens is people take advantage of that, and they just start flooding people with information, so that way it kind of makes them immune to the experience of starting things again.
Mhm.
So it's almost like that's one thing why I shied away from a lot of motivational stuff. Is I said the only way for me to get the experience is to do it myself.
Right.
You know what I mean? And the only way I can learn to love again is if I do it myself.
Mhm.
Not that I can't get advice, not that I can't get perspective, but I think we live in a day and age where people think, all right, the more information I overload myself with, it'll circumvent the feeling of experience or
Right.
the lack thereof.
Mhm.
So people take advantage of that. And it's not just people like Derrick Jaxn. There's the people that are like, oh, I'm a real estate mogul and da 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 da. Take this workshop for like $500,
Right.
and it's like you're not really saying nothing. But for the people that are afraid to start,
Mhm.
it's like, all right, let me take that.
Yeah. I think that was like a huge issue I had with Clubhouse too. Uh,
Oh my god.
yeah, because and I'm not on it anymore, but
Mm-hmm.
podcasts, for those who don't know, kind of felt like, I mean, podcast, sorry, Clubhouse, for you guys who don't know, felt like this like huge podcast thing that was like really popular towards the end of 2020, and it's kind of fizzled out. But it's basically lending itself to what I feel is lending itself to what Jared was saying, which is just like, you give these people a platform who don't necessarily need one. And it's okay. Like, not everybody is meant to be a moderator. Not
Right.
everybody is meant to give advice, and there's a lot of people out here who give valid advice that's really not valid. Um, and so I think it's really important, that you say that, because obviously, like, not everybody is meant to be listened to, and not everybody
Mm-hmm.
has great advice. And it's really important to, one, do your own research, which I think is lacking, again, because of social media and just how easily accessible things are. But I was gonna say a two, but I forget what the two was. But
I'm so sorry.
no, that's my fault. My mind is always like everywhere. But I say all that to say, like, that's why I wasn't a fan of Clubhouse, just because anybody could give advice to anybody. And I think what was a little bit different about Clubhouse from Twitter was, or Instagram, is that Clubhouse like felt a bit more exclusive, because at a certain
Yeah.
point it was only certain people could be on it. Now, like,
Mm-hmm.
everybody's on it. People are selling invites and just doing all this crazy stuff. But then you have somebody who's a moderator, who's leading these rooms, who are speaking, and it's the same as you're saying with people who are hosting seminars, who don't know what they're talking about. And so you have all these people who like really like believe what you're saying, and this is nothing new. Like, people
Not
have
at all.
for years and years and years before even the internet existed. But now it's heightened because of social media. So I definitely think that it's important to have people who either know what they're talking about, or can acknowledge that they know what they know, and they still have more to learn. Like, it's important for those two types of people, to have the forefront.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to hear that that's what you're doing with your podcast. But yeah, I mean, I think that was the last question I had for you. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we dip out? I know we talked about when your show comes on, the premise of the show, maybe
Yeah.
some of the topics you kind of touch on. So
Honestly, just follow me on Instagram. And my podcast page is I keep butchering it. It's the underscore IIWII underscore podcast. And if there's anybody out there that needs a platform to really talk about, what it is they have going on,
yeah.
my door is always open. That's another thing I like about my thing. It's always open. So if there's ever anybody's like, hey, I got this going on, review it, check it out. Let's
Awesome.
see if we could have an episode. By all means, just hit me up.
Dope.
And
Well,
thank you again for having me on.
you're welcome. Well, dope. Y'all heard what he said. Tap in. Can you just let us know what type of guest you're typically looking for, or does it?
It doesn't matter. It,
Okay.
it doesn't matter. Honestly, it could. like I have like someone that talked about marriage. I have a realtor coming on Sunday. I had a community activist one day.
Yeah.
The last episode, I had these guys that make their own Star Wars fan made stories and choreo with the fights and stuff like that. So if you have something going on that you feel should be discussed, I'm my door is always open.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jared, for
Thank
coming on
you.
your show. I'm gonna have to check out the It Is What It Is podcast. I
Yeah.
listened to like a little bit of clips from your show, but I'll have to check out a whole thing because I would love to hear, you talking about these different topics. And I think I'm not into Star Wars, but I think that that's really cool that you had somebody on there who does kind of like a choreo type of thing. That's how I
Because
like.
I'm not either.
Yeah.
That was my favorite thing. I wasn't really either, and just like, oh my god. So yeah.
Yeah. That's how I like to do my show too. Like I just, if you have something to say, come on. But again, I thank you so much for being here. And for the It Is What It Is podcast, I think what you're doing is really important.
Thank you.
And I'm so happy that we were able to have this conversation.
Same here.
Yeah, and so also for you guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of A Millennial Voice. I'm here again with the Philadelphia Sunday Sun. As you guys know, my name is Danae. You guys can check us out at www.philasun.com for our articles that we do weekly, or you can get us in print for only $40 a year. Again, Jared, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And I'm so excited to see what you do in the future.